My local game store has a regular D&D night that I've been attending for a few years. All the DMs are volunteers that receive free admission and snacks for their services. I've had mostly good experiences there, and usually the DMs and other players are really nice and fun-loving. But recently, I had one truly terrible night involving a DM who really should have known better. I had been playing with a DM I really liked for about a month. He did a series of interconnected one-shots to accommodate for the naturally shifting nature of the group. That week, he couldn't come for work reasons, so I was assigned to a different table with a DM and players I didn't know. I actually went in pretty optimistic. I was excited to play with another woman as the DM, and the conversation we had while waiting for the other players seemed promising. Turns out she worked for the store and ran D&D games for the kids after school program. She asked for my patience since this was her first time running D&D for adults. I told her not to worry about it. My first DM had also worked for the store, and he always said that running games for the kids helped him keep his skills sharp. I should note that if she was a volunteer unaffiliated with the store, I probably would have been more forgiving of some of her later behavior. Anyway, this new DM seemed really excited about this one-shot, and I initially had a lot of fun chatting about it beforehand. The other two players arrived a little while later, and they seemed a bit rowdy, but otherwise pretty enthusiastic. The game started, and the DM told us that we had heard of a wizard that had produced some stones of wondrous power, and we were traveling to barter with the notorious jerk wizard. We stopped at a spooky, decrepit inn run by a creepy old lady and her slightly pathetic middle-aged son, David. This opening scene was quite fun. We messed around a little and cracked jokes, and so far I was enjoying myself. I did notice that at times the DM made choices for our characters that I felt like it should have been left to us, that tended towards summary over role-playing, but I brushed it off. I rationalized that the kids probably needed more hand-holding than adult players to stay on task. The problems started escalating after we left the inn. The other two players, who I will call Shouty Murder Cleric and Enabler Rogue, started to show a tendency towards murder hoboism. Shouty Murder Cleric seemed to think that it was the height of comedy to attack random bystanders while yelling at the top of his lungs. Enabler Rogue and DM were laughing at his antics, and I was desperately and unsuccessfully trying to steer us back to role-playing by any means necessary. I started to notice that the DM wasn't calling skill checks unless specifically prompted to, and even a couple of times did not even make Enabler Rogue do an attack roll when he joined in on Shouty Murder Cleric's antics. But I didn't realize the true extent of the incompetence until two things happened back to back. First, we met a new NPC in the forest, and I turned to the DM and I said what I thought was clearly in character, "What is your name, friend?" DM looked at me confused and said, "I'm the DM." I then had to explain to her that I was talking in character to the new NPC that we just met. That's when I realized she really didn't have a handle on basic role-playing. The second thing happened 10 minutes later, when we returned to the inn. We had learned that the old lady was a witch who had been kidnapping the locals and baking them into pies. We went down into the basement to fight her and got into our first combat of the game. The DM asked us to roll initiative. The other players who were new to the game asked some questions about which part of their sheets affected combat and such. I took a couple of minutes to help them find their initiative bonus, weapon stats, etc. During this whole interaction, the DM was silent and offered no advice. Once I was done helping the other players, the first thing the DM said was, "Who wants to go first?" I was taken aback. We had just rolled initiative. She should know that there was a set turn order now. I reminded her of this and she listened to me but still seemed confused. She seemed to know that rolling initiative was a thing you had players do, but not what it meant. Throughout the whole combat, I frequently had to explain how pretty much any of the basic mechanics worked. For example, I made an attack roll and she described my action until I stopped her to remind her that I hadn't even rolled the damage yet. It was a mess. I got the impression that she did not have any stats for the witch and was just flailing through the whole thing. Then we took a quick break. While DM and Shouty Murder Cleric went to get snacks, Enabler Rogue started chatting with me. He could tell I was frustrated and asked me to voice my opinions if I wasn't having fun. I floated a test comment about the DM being a little looser with the rules than I would like, to see if he'd back me up on her incompetence. But he shrugged it off, and I felt like since the rest of the table was having fun, that challenging the DM would make me the bad guy. I really should have faked a family emergency and left during the break, but I had paid for the session, and somehow I thought I could gently push the DM to actually learn the rules. It only got worse from there. We picked up after burning the inn down and setting the prisoners free. David, the old lady's son, was bewildered and lost, and wanted to come with us. My character gently explained that he didn't have the skills for adventuring, but I took an interest in trying to settle him somewhere with a job so he could rebuild his life. I should add that we had learned that the witch wasn't actually his mother and had kidnapped him as a child. For a couple of minutes, I was actually role-playing and having a good time. Then, Shouty Murder Cleric got bored and decided to kill David because he could. DM thought this was hilarious. It continued on like this. I spent the rest of the game explaining the rules to the DM. Not my idea of fun. I'm usually not a rules lawyer. And trying to convince the other players that killing random bystanders in their hometown made no sense. They started getting annoyed with me for wanting to have an actual story, and I started to feel like I was the bad guy here. The DM and the other players were having fun. They weren't actually playing D&D, but I was the only one not enjoying myself. I really should have made an excuse and left, especially after we accomplished our initial goal, but the one-shot meandered aimlessly for another hour. At the end, DM was really excited and talked about running a longer campaign. She looked around at the whole table, including me, and started talking like we all had agreed on this. She still didn't seem to understand how fundamentally clueless she was towards the actual rules. I told her that I was committed to my normal DM and would be going back to his game when he returned next week. I certainly never wanted to get stuck in this situation again. I could not believe that someone who ran this game regularly for the store could be so incompetent. After talking it over with some friends, I decided to send an email to the store's RPG program suggesting that someone go over the basic rules with her. I don't know what happened, but I haven't seen her running tables at D&D night since. I hate that I feel guilty about this, but she was definitely gearing up to run more D&D for the store, and sooner or later, she probably would have run into a more experienced player who wasn't willing to be as diplomatic as I was when complaining about her. This is a very weird case of bad D&D, when the DM knows nothing and everyone is enjoying themselves except you. The best thing would have been to leave earlier. This is where sunk cost is tough. She paid to have fun, but instead paid to suffer. What do you think about this story?